country debates CAA, NPR, NRC, Aadhar has quietly completed 10 years of existence. The 10-digit unique identifier is now used by nearly 1.2 billion people, including 95% of India's adult population. A study conducted by development consulting firm Dalberg reports that 72% of people appreciate the convenience offered by Aadhar. However, almost a half of them are also concerned about the safety of their data. Now, while Aadhar has managed to provide us with one single identifying document, it has also raised several concerns of data privacy and what the government has done to protect such a mammoth amount of information collected. So, joining me now to talk about 10 years of Aadhar and answer the question of whether it's a boon or a bane, I'm speaking now with Nikhil Pahwa and, of course, Sahil Kini of iSpirit, Nikhil Pahwa of MediaNama.com. Welcome to both of you and thank you for speaking with us on this show today. Nikhil, let me begin with you because you and I think, over the years have had several conversations about Aadhar from the privacy angle, from whenever it has gone to courts. It has survived, backed by governments, not just by the NDA. It was actually started by the UPA and is now an omnipresent sort of a part of everyone's lives. Do you think it's done more good than harm?
Well, I think you need to ask those millions of people. 132 million was the estimate by CIS, whose data, Aadhaar-related data was leaked by government websites online. Those people have been compromised for the rest of their lives with that data being made public. You have to ask those people whose data was accessed by, operators who were selling access to the database in Punjab, which Ritika Kheda had reported on, whose data has probably been compromised as well. There are innumerable instances of people's data having been leaked, and because of the permanence and the omnipresence of Aadhar, just like we have an omnipresent and almost omniscient government, it becomes a single point of failure. To my mind, it's flawed by design because it's a single point of failure for any individual. And once compromised, it's difficult for an individual to reclaim their privacy or reclaim their identity. And they really have no recourse to the complaints. They don't even have a complaints redressal mechanism in place even now. So I think it's done more harm, and it's going to be over the years that we see the damage that is being done to citizens keep coming out, bit by bit. And unfortunately, there's no recourse available to those people. Let's also not forget, Tamanna, that Aadhar was the basis for this government to go to the Supreme Court and argue that privacy isn't a fundamental right. And even though the court upheld the Aadhar Act, and I do think it shouldn't have, it struck down very key provisions and tried to limit Aadhar because it understood very well that when it's available at scale, it has potential for damage. In fact, it tried to prevent commercial exploitation by removing Section 57. But that doesn't stop many entities from still asking for Aadhar, including schools. Someone wrote to me a couple of days ago, worried that his ward's school was asking for Aadhar to be entered into a database. Now, those children, and their information is potentially going to be linked to one number for the rest of their lives. And every single instance where this information gets duplicated becomes
Nikhil, the fact is that today functionally, functionally doing anything without Aadhar is impossible. Whether it's a school admission, whether it's a new phone connection, despite everything that the Supreme Court has said. And the Supreme Court's purpose was that Aadhar should be mandatory for those who are taking something from the state. If you're not taking a subsidy, then you shouldn't have to have an Aadhar. But the fact is that no one can really live without it.
But Tamanna, Tamanna, that's exactly how surveillance capitalism works. The government surveils through the capitalism ecosystem that is created around that, which surveils for it. If you look at the data protection bill, in that, government access to data is not restricted at all in the new version that's come out. And so therefore, everyone who's collecting Aadhaar data or Aadhaar number along with other data sets has a unique single identifier for that individual, and the government can has no restriction on accessing that data. So, I'd be suspicious of any entity that is collecting Aadhaar related data today and forever, because of the nature of this bill that's come out that doesn't restrict government access. And that's what we've been looking at from the very beginning, that what we've been saying is that Aadhaar is a means to a surveillance ecosystem. And, it was, again, they talked about enabling facial recognition and facial ID along with Aadhaar. And what you're seeing at the protests these days is that the police is going around with video cameras, filming protesters, and it also has facial recognition systems that can be used to identify them. So look, I'm someone who started out supporting technology. I still support technology, but I strongly believe that there need to be significant restrictions. There is no restriction on facial recognition systems in India, but in California, though, there are several cities which are banning their police from using facial recognition.
Let me get the other point of view, Nikhil.
In India,
let me get
no
Sahil Kini into the conversation.
available.
Right, Sahil, 10 years of Aadhaar, pretty much everyone has it. 95% of Indians have it. But what purpose is it really serving? In the sense, as a proof of identity, it's incomplete. You still need other documents with it. It's not become the only document you need. It's not a proof of citizenship. So what really does it serve? What purpose does it serve? Unless you are receiving a subsidy from the government, and then your argument is at least it's not going somewhere else, it's going directly to the account of the person who needs a subsidy. Apart from that, for someone who's not taking a subsidy, what purpose does it really serve?
It's a great question, and one of the things that you should keep in mind when you're talking about what purpose it serves, more than 70% of the population of this country actively takes subsidies from the government, and to be able to claim it effectively is not a non-trivial use case. Just because the people on this panel and the people watching this channel who are typically English speaking, relatively well off, may or may not use subsidies for the government. The rest of the country, the real Bharat, if you will, is in desperate need of government aid, and is in desperate need of government aid that does not get waylaid along the way. So being able to deliver target subsidies is a significant and a game-changing use case that has delivered.
We'll come to that in a bit. Yeah, no, I'm going to come to that in a bit. I'm going to come to that, and I purposely asked you what about the rest, because when you go into subsidies, then it's about finger recognition failure and all of that. So not for a minute saying that target subsidies are not important. Not trying to sound elitist here. Just wondering that if you're not taking subsidies, you're still stuck having to use this documentation for everything. And it's not just public enterprise. Any kind of service you want, that you have to provide your Aadhaar card. That is the reality of this world. But what purpose does it serve for me?
I can understand why this one document is being singled out as something that is so difficult to provide, when 95% of the population already has it. And your own Aadhaar trustometer that you put up right now, based on that Dalberg report, which surveyed 167,000 people, say that 92% of the people there feel like their data is safe. So regardless of what people like Nikhil and his ilk say about data not being safe, this is the public perception that the data is safe. The other issue around when people keep talking about Aadhaar leaks, and that's something that I'd like to address proactively, this is information that was disclosed by government on subsidy information. This is balancing transparency of use of public funds with accountability and privacy. Now, when you are claiming subsidy, people the bureaucracy has often, and as a matter of course, put out information about who has claimed this subsidy in government databases before. Now, just because they've kind of published this on government websites, and these leaks that have come from quote unquote leaks, if you will, have been proactively published on government websites. So calling it an Aadhaar leak is a bit of a misnomer. This is data that is published by entities that are giving away subsidies. Now, to avail any service in this country, you have to provide information about who you are and documentation about who you are. So Aadhaar is a simple and relatively easy way of sharing this information. Now, the Supreme Court has opined on this at length.
Yeah.
We've gone to court several times. They've talked
Right.
about Aadhaar being constitutional, it not being a violation of
Yes.
privacy, and yet people insist on towing this other line, which is frankly against the directions of the Supreme Court.
No, no,
So
the Supreme Court has not directed that nobody can have a view against Aadhaar. That's not what
no,
any
no,
court has said.
absolutely not. But
So
calling it
having a view that Aadhaar is not a good idea is not against the Supreme Court direction. Uh,
sure,
let's
clear, they're
let's make
entitled
that
to
clear.
that.
So we're having this debate today for this very reason. Aadhaar has been here for 10 years. So some things now are beyond debate. The fact that it's ubiquitous, it's part of everyone's life. 95% of Indians have it. But we must still ask whether concerns have been addressed. Nikhil, you want to respond to a few things that Sahil has said, and one of them being, let's not forget about the 70%. He's put that figure out that needs government services, and now there is clarity that those who truly need them are getting
Yes.
them. It's not being waylaid. That was the strongest selling point of Aadhaar, and I remember that very well. It was the biggest pitch that there will not be ghost entries in some register. The poorest of the poor who deserve that subsidy will get it directly into their accounts because of Aadhaar.
Well, I think the problem is that no one knows how many ghost entries there are in Aadhaar. If you remember the early days of Aadhaar, there were instances of chairs and dogs and even Dhania getting an Aadhaar card. In fact, until about a year and a half ago, as was revealed by one of the researchers, Lord Hanuman had a functional Aadhaar card that was getting LPG subsidy in a bank account. So, look, the UIDAI even till date has not disclosed how many fake entries there are and whether they can even identify fake entries. And it has been proven that fake entries can be made. In fact, there have been instances where people who have got, like, there are criminals who've been caught with fake Aadhaar cards under other names. So look, we at this point in time, we don't know whether that money that's going into subsidy is going into the right bank accounts or not. And also this doesn't prevent quantity fraud. So someone can basically, even at a shop, defraud away rations, not give them to people. And again, this has been shown. There have been instances, for example, where people have had to, where the machines haven't been functional, or the biometric recognition is not functional, or old people whose fingerprints have worn out, or workers whose fingerprints have worn out. That's not functional. So let's be, on a practical level, what the government does is, and what Sahil is likely to argue, that these are percentage errors, and these can be talked away just by saying that 70x number of percentage of people are happy with it. That doesn't mean that these issues don't exist for those who are facing these issues. Yes, there was corruption. Yes, there is corruption. But the fact is that
Has corruption come
you're
down,
basically
Nikhil?
putting the
Has
onus on the
corruption come
citizen
down?
to prove that they are not.
As someone who has vociferously argued against
who knows?
Aadhaar, would you say corruption has come down since before Aadhaar?
Where is the proof? Where is the proof, right? If indeed there were those fictitious 90,000 crores of savings because of Aadhaar, why does the government have to, to go to the RBI to take that money in order to balance its budget, and go to SEBI to do that? Has the government disclosed exactly how much savings there is from Aadhaar? They haven't, because they don't know. They have no means of knowing those savings, right? So let's Aadhaar was always a solution looking for a problem, and this subsidy bit was basically a narrative that was built around it, that they sold to people. On the face of it, to my mind, Aadhaar is a means for a surveillance ecosystem, right? I also want to point out that Justice Chandrachud's dissent in Aadhaar, and I disagree with the majority judgment, and I do believe that the majority judgment should and will eventually be overturned in the Aadhaar case. But Justice Chandrachud's judgment was used in Jamaica by their Supreme Court to strike down their system. So and that has been a much lauded judgment, to be honest. So
I want to let Sahil respond.
when it comes to leaks,
let's just keep this moving. Let's just keep this moving. I want to get Sahil to respond.
Made. No, let me just finish, Tamanna. Sahil had made the point about leaks.
Yeah.
Listen, the government had published that information on websites. They had put people's name, mobile number, Aadhaar number, address, mother's name, father's name. All of this information had been published, linked to a single identity. Has the government provided a recourse to those people whose personal details, including that permanent Aadhaar number that were published, to change their Aadhaar number? Because they've been compromised for the rest of their lives with that information. You can, with that kind of information, you can change people's bank account details. You can transfer bank accounts.
Yeah, I want to come to see two basic things, two basic promises of Aadhaar. One of them was, of course, that subsidies would reach those who truly deserve it, and the number of cases of those not able to get their subsidies because their prints didn't match or there were internet problems, the Supreme Court had to step in and said that no one's fundamental rights, should be taken away just because they do not have an Aadhaar card or they've not been able to match the Aadhaar card. So that clearly has been a problem. The second big promise was that this would be a one unique single identity replacing everything else. And that was the convenience pitch. There has been a lacuna. You will have to admit that. There is nowhere where just the Aadhaar works. You have to provide something along with it, because it's not an address proof by itself. It's not an identification proof by itself. Which is why I started by saying I'm not sure what it really does.
Well, if the system was used the way it should be used, and like it was before, there were some restrictions on electronic KYC. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is to actually open a bank account or to open financial services, to get a loan or to get formal financial services, which is driving financial inclusion is a priority for any government, for any country, and particularly for this country where formal financial services are deeply underpenetrated. And the reason why India's poorest and the middle class or the lower middle class struggle to get formal financial services is the cost of service delivery is high. And that's because the paperwork involved is high. The cost of acquiring a customer for a bank or a financial services institution can be up to 1,000 to 2,000 rupees if you follow a paper-based process. If you followed Aadhaar eKYC, the cost is 100 times lower, and therefore you can give smaller ticket size loans, you can open zero balance accounts. The 350 million bank accounts that were opened during Jan Dhan were opened only using Aadhaar authentication. The 8 million Kotak 811 accounts that were opened using only Aadhaar authentication, Aadhaar eKYC, and delivering banking services to those who need it the most, and delivering government subsidies to those who need it the most was the express purpose of Aadhaar. And Nikhil can say what he wants about surveillance state. His paranoia has been
express purpose. Every 95% people have Aadhaar. You can't do without it. Everyone's asking for it.
Yes, absolutely. No, I'm
not. You want to buy a new SIM card, you have to give Aadhaar. You want to rent a house, you have to give Aadhaar.
You
want to enroll your child in school, you have to give Aadhaar.
All you need is to do biometric authentication using Aadhaar. You don't have to provide any other document.
Okay.
During the period of eKYC being prevalent, to open a bank account, all you needed to do was biometric authentication using Aadhaar.
The Supreme Court rolled that back. I'm really out of time on this.
It has introduced this recently, although with certain limitations.
One last comment, Tamanna.
Okay.
Precisely what we should talk about, saying how do we make Aadhaar authentication more accessible.
One last comment, Tamanna, please.
Okay. Now the thing is, this is okay. I have to end it because I'm out of time. Nikhil, I will give you one last 10 seconds to round it off.
Please.
Yes.
If I may, one last thing. So the way I would look at Aadhaar is, where is the choice, right? Did people have a choice whether to choose whether they can use another ID or not? They had to get an Aadhaar. When it comes to subsidies, they don't have a choice but to get an Aadhaar. They've been forced into it. The point is that if you give people alternatives, they may choose the alternative that they feel is safest for them.
That is also not
the
true.
Government has
in the
not given them
1,67,000 people that were surveyed, they said 90% of them said that they would provide it as their first ID.
I'm going to have to end it here. Guys, I'm going to have to end it here. 10 years later, the debate is still hot and brewing on Aadhaar. Let's hope that our data is safe, as has been claimed. There's tons of data out there. Let's hope it's ring-fenced, as has been promised. On that note, I want to thank both of you for joining us on the debate this evening.